It was a completely random encounter. "Why do you look so troubled, young one?" The voice came from an elderly man who sat on a bench by the roadside. He had red hair, ebony skin, and crimson eyes. He wore a dark robe, holding his walking stick very tightly as he looked at Adonis on that fateful day. The old man had 2 horns, which should have made him a lower middle-class member of society, yet he seemed a little too posh for that. Still, his appearance was the least suspicious thing about him. It was the way he smiled. Perhaps it was because Adonis was growing frustrated with planning, or because he was growing increasingly worried about his friends back in the capital, but he couldn't help but feel uneasy when he looked into the man's eyes. Still, he knew better than to act on how he felt. Doing so would only make him appear suspicious, and that would taint his cover. "It's nothing," Adonis replied with a shrug and began walking away. In his mind, he already crossed the encounter off as completely unimportant, and he had more important things to deal with. Besides, merely talking to dragons disgusted him beyond words. If only he knew how much he would owe to the old man once the next words came out of his mouth, he wouldn't have been so hasty to walk away. "You remind me of my kid. He's doing his best in the academy right now, working hard for the sake of the emperor. We look nothing alike." "Stop talking nonsense," Adonis thought to himself, wondering how he could possibly remind him of his son. The man appeared old, which meant he must have lived for several centuries at least. How could his kid look like him? There were so many holes in the old man's words that made Adonis grow increasingly more upset, but he controlled his temper and kept walking away. He had nothing to say to a senile old dragon. My boy, if he proves himself in that academy, he could finally be taken to the capital to serve the emperor. As soon as Adonis heard this, he froze in his tracks. Academy. Capital. Emperor. Indeed, the capital was the dwelling place of the emperor. It was also where the power of the empire was centralized. It was no surprise that the Chamber of Ancients existed there too. Only a select number of dragons could live in the capital, and all of them had one purpose or the other there. They either served their empire exceptionally well in wars, or proved themselves in one major way or the other. This was the first time Adonis was hearing about the academy being another way for someone to get into the academy, hence his interest in it. What are you talking about? What else? Internship, of course. My son's performance is great, you know. Once you reach the 3rd stage in the academy, you must go for a compulsory internship within the empire. Including the capital. Adonis muttered, his eyes wide open. Only those in Class A are considered for that privilege, though. It's not guaranteed for any other class, so my son is working very hard to reach Class A before moving to Stage 3. The capital, it's such a dream come true, isn't it? As Adonis heard this, he smiled at a dragon for the first time in his life. Indeed, it is. After that encounter, Adonis combed through the closest library he could find and researched for the validity of the information he just received. Much to his amazement, everything was legit. That old man, he wasn't lying. An exceptional student in their 3rd stage, Class A, could indeed apply for an internship in the capital. If he could secure a role in his desired location, then he could easily increase the proximity between himself and the chamber. And within that chamber, the key to my regression. Adonis helped Luciel with setting up the ancient magic circle back then, so he was confident that he could do it on his own if he had enough time. All of a sudden, a viable path opened for him, and he could see his dreams coming to fruition. I have that old man to thank. I never even considered the academy in all my reasoning. How long would it have taken me before I thought in that direction? He still despised dragons to death, and he recognized that the old dragon was definitely someone who had committed his fair share of atrocities before retiring. How else would he be living a comfortable life? Still, he was indebted to the monster. If I ever encounter him after my regression, I'll be sure to thank him with a quick death. As for his plans regarding the academy, Adonis made sure to learn as much as he could about the school's requirements for entry, which was perhaps the easiest part of his whole journey, and how he could advance to a higher stage. Of course, in order to avoid suspicion, Adonis had to make sure he didn't advance too quickly. At the same time, he couldn't be too slow. As a result of this rationale, he developed a roadmap for himself. Everything was scheduled down to the littlest of details, all to ensure he stuck to his plan and completed everything on schedule. Training, study, classes. Everything was accounted for, and Adonis could feel himself making progress every single day. After spending about a month in Class B, which he got into after his entrance exams, he was able to make it to Class A by simply besting everyone else in his class. With his position in Class A solidified, his next goal was to get into the second stage of the academy after a few more academy events, perhaps in a couple of months. The only part of his integration that lacked proper strength was his interaction with peers, but Adonis couldn't help it. He didn't have time to forge meaningless connections, and he despised dragons. There was no need to make friends. Everything was going perfect in his timeline, and he predicted that within a year or so, he could even achieve his mission without any trouble whatsoever. However, Ray just had to come and ruin everything. The presence of Rai and Luke IA in Class 1A set the bar of excellence high in their grade, but none of that bothered Adonis too much. He was currently stronger than a dragon general, so he wasn't particularly worried about competition among dragon newts. He could even beat the lecturers, so there was no real need to be concerned. Besides, he was already determined to leave 1A in a few months, so he didn't think he'd interact with them much. How wrong could he have been? Not only did one of them force him to lead him to his room, but that person turned out to be Ray. Everything spiraled out of control from there, leading Adonis to his current predicament. But so what? As he whispered to himself, he raised his head and clenched his fist with pure resolve. I've come this far already. Adonis quickened his pace at this point. He abandoned everyone and came here for one mission, and he planned to complete it in his own way. Whatever it takes. I'll save all of us. Asterisk. 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 A/N. Thanks for reading. Well, that was a touching perspective on Adonis. I wonder, though, how things will turn out. The next day. All right, students, you know the drill. It's time for your practical session. Instructor Israel's two hands were formally placed behind him as he stood at the center of an empty practice hall, facing his 15 students. He had a stern look on his face, and for good reason. As Class A's primary instructor, he was in charge of the growth of these young ones, which meant he was to personally oversee their training such as this one in order to determine how much they had grown, or the measures of improvements they needed. It was also pertinent for him to pluck out the inferior students and consider their demotion to a lower class. All of this was his responsibility, and he was constantly determined to carry it out with utmost diligence. That said, he had no doubt that his students would show him yet another interesting match today. The only variables are the new students. I haven't seen them fight, so now is the best chance to do so. The footage of entrance exams weren't supposed to be released to the instructors of the academy, and he didn't have enough pull to check them out behind the scenes. The only things he was given to work with were evaluations made from the center. Well, I guess I'll see it with my own eyes. His eyes focused on the boy with jet black hair, and the girl with silvery white hair. Let's see how good you are. Today, you'll be placed into groups of 3. The moment Ray heard this, his mood was nearly soiled. He had expected some sort of one-on-one practical session, but it turned out things weren't going to be too straightforward after all. Still, he wasn't too disappointed. I'll finally be able to copy the skills of some of my classmates. I initially wasn't expecting too much, since they're nudes, but there are a few potential ones among them. Besides, he could simply sell off the skills that he didn't need, getting more stats to his stockpile. A win-win situation. There will be a total of 5 groups. With all of that understood, I shall now call the name of the team members per group. The listings began, and Ray didn't hear his name until the very end. Lucielle was paired with me, J.A., and another girl called Amanda, the serious girl with round glasses. Ado and I got paired with Phi Rabel and Moracho. And as for Ray, looks like my teammates are Chigo and Lou Ffa. As soon as he turned to look at them, they also gave their attention to him. Chigo was dressed in his usual manner, having his uniform nearly buttoned down, revealing his bare chest and the tons of chains that hung around his neck. He had piercings on his ear, eyebrows, nose, lip and one on his tongue. He also had rings and bracelets that glimmered as he removed his hands from his packers. After seeing all of this, it was a wonder why piercings and accessories of such magnitude weren't banned in the academy. Of course, Ray already knew why. At least, for Chigo's sake, certain students were allowed to go to the extreme with their fashion choices. It wasn't an arbitrary decision for sure. It has to do with his skill. I can't say the same about. Hey, there. My name is Lou Ffa. Rai, let's do our best, okay? Ray maintained his composure as he was nearly run into by the boy wearing a straw hat, and a stupidly wide grin. He had red eyes and white hair, and honestly would have been the male version of Lucielle if it wasn't for his really conspicuous straw hat. That's just a fashion choice and has nothing to do with his skills. This was his team, 2 weirdos that were dressed strangely, with eccentric personalities that he wasn't the most comfortable with. Lucielle ended up with a pretty stable team, and so did Ado and I, so why? Why did he have to get such a team? Ray wasn't the least bit disappointed in the current situation, though. In fact, he found himself getting a bit excited as he stared at them. Nice to meet you, Lou Ffa. You too, Chigo. After all, despite their eccentric personalities, they were among the class strongest. Humph. Just don't hold me back, K. Chigo responded as he drew closer to Ray and Lou Ffa, still maintaining his tough boy persona. It wasn't all an act, though. I guess he has some stuff to back it up. We'll see all that once we begin, won't we? All the teams gathered their members together, and before long, the 5 clusters of students had formed. They all stared at their instructor and awaited further instructions. As expected, he did not disappoint. For the whole day, you and your team will collectively engage in activities to amass points. Of course, the total point of the group will be divided by 3, and allocated to each member there. Please note that it isn't enough for you to do well. Everyone in your group must excel. As expected. Ray smiled. I guess I have nothing to be worried about, considering the kind of people I have in my corner. Still, the part I'm most worried about is our teamwork. It wasn't enough for the students to be strong, but they had to function well together in order to properly win and amass points. Normally, none of these would really concern Ray. However, considering the consequences of failure, he had to make sure he didn't screw this up, and also ensure his teammates didn't do the same. A demotion is the last thing I need right now. There will be a total of 5 tasks for today. Team matches, hide and seek, object search, individual matches, and finally, weapon proficiency. Fair or unfair, this was the nature of any academy, no, of society as a whole. You all better not drag my points down. Chigo growled at his 2 teammates, clenching his fist as he listened to the instructor's words. Hee hee. This should be fun. Lou Ffa grinned like an idiot. Through all this, Ray simply maintained his silence and calm demeanor as he awaited the practical session's commencement. I should brace myself for the worst. Asterisk. 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 A/N. Thanks for reading. Mass release officially begins tomorrow. This time, I'm serious. Boom. In a single strike, Ray's fire spell knocked out the competition, easily securing him the victory for his own individual match. His opponent, Moricho, had been quite impressive, especially with the blue orbs and clones that he employed as his main skills. Unfortunately for him, he was simply outclassed. The fight didn't last very long. Ray simply relied on a barrier to protect himself from Moricho's attacks, while pretending to make a long chant for the powerful flame spell that he used to decidedly end the match. Frankly, the battle was a bit stale. On the plus side, I now have access to a clone skill. That's good, but, sacrifice won't let me copy it, since I already sacrificed it in my fight with Dagon. Unless. Ray checked his doppel, and much to his pleasant surprise, the doppelganger skill was waiting for him there. How is this possible? Hold on, yeah, I guess it makes sense. He itched his chin, completely disconnected from the reality around him, and the voices that cheered his victory. His mind was solely fixated on this skill. Snow's duplicate was an exclusive skill, and since she was a beast familiar, that skill has no ties with this world, right? So, even if it was sacrificed, I should still be able to copy any clone-based skill from this world, right? And that was the sole reason behind his ability to use doppelganger. Looks like this is a limited form of duplicate, though. My clones can only respond to one instruction at a time, and we can't be too far apart, or they'll disappear. The plus side of the whole thing was that the clones had the same abilities as him, just on a 10% scale. At the very least, though, they didn't make him any weaker if he used them. My perfect divine growth graduated it to S tier, but that only increases the number of clones I can make. It seems the distance and intelligence limitations still exist, though I guess they can move a bit further from me now. Finally, their abilities were still capped at 10% of his own power, though now that he could make a total of 10 clones, that meant he could get 100% of his power without compromising his own strength. That's pretty neat. He smiled to himself. As for the practical session, things were also going pretty well. So far, his worries hadn't played out the way he feared they would. His teammates, despite their opposing personalities, got along quite well in their team activities. They had already participated in team matches, hide and seek, and object search together, and the two of them were rather cooperative. Chigo seemed like he would cause the most trouble, but after the team match, he was pretty docile. Maybe it's because I practically carried the match. Dragons have a thing for strength, so I figured they'd listen to me if I showed them how strong I was. That wasn't the only reason he one-shotted the enemy, though. I wanted to end the fight quickly so they wouldn't mess up and cost me points. Guess it was just killing two birds with one stone. Ultimately, he got the respect of his teammates, and he was also able to complete the practical session without much casualty. For the second and third parts of the session, Israel used a core function of the hall to alter its landscape and transform its surroundings into a jungle-like setting. That way, the hide and seek and object search became astronomically more complex than it would have been if they were merely standing in plain rooms. Ray and his teammates stuck together during the hide and seek round, and since none of the other two had any camouflage skills, he made sure to utilize a spell that shielded them from perception, while also telling them to keep their senses peeled for anyone. They managed to catch a team using this tactic, but were ultimately caught by Lucille's team, who chose to hide in plain sight the air while getting a wide view of the entire jungle to capture their prey. They managed to catch two teams, Ray's included. As for the object search, Ray and his teammates were also unsuited for that, so they simply trailed another team hoping to snag one of the designated objects if those members ever found it. Fortunately, they were able to get 2 of the 10 objects before time ran out. Once those parts were concluded, the instructor returned the hall settings to its previous state, and after they took a little break, began the 4th round. Individual matches. Ray was the first in his team to fight, so he now had to leave the center stage and allow the rest of his teammates to take over. Unlike before, when he could lead them or drop vague hints to guide them, this was something they had to do on their own. If he hadn't gone through everything he did with his teammates, he would have even had doubts regarding their competence. Ray wasn't too worried, though. Sure, these 2 sucked at hide and seek as well as object search, but when it came to combat, there was no cause for concern. He simply had to sit back and enjoy the matches. They didn't disappoint. Lou Ffa had a skill that could turn his body, or anything around him to rubber, which made any fight he was in rather interesting. He also had immense resistance to physical attacks as a bonus. From stretching, to increasing his body's mass, to simply tanking enemy attacks like it was nothing, he was a monster in every sense of the word. However, the true beast was Chigo. Yes, he had a skill to elevate his physical ability and also to increase his level of mana and sensory awareness. However, what made him exceptional was his single A-tier skill, Iron Y. The ability to imbue any property or attribute to any iron object he touched. This was the true reason behind his piercing, and the reason he was regarded as one of the big 3 in the whole class. As long as he had iron on his side, he was invincible. Asterisk. 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 A/N. Thanks for reading. Chigo was a dragon nude with one of the best offensive abilities in the entire grade, particularly Class 1A. By placing attributes on iron, he could practically turn a random object to an enchanted item, alter its shape, and so much more. It was an all-rounder skill that he mostly used to his advantage in combat. As invincible as Chigo was, though. Chigo down, Adonai wins. There were certain walls that he could not overcome, no matter how hard he tried. Impressive. Those were Ray's thoughts as he watched the final individual match to its conclusion. It was Chigo versus Adonai, and while Ray already knew the outcome deep down, he expected more of a fight from his teammate. In a way, Chigo dished out a proper fight. However, I guess he was just heavily outclassed. Ray already knew the status information of both opponents, so as much as he wanted his side to win, he already had the outcome in his head. What he didn't know was just how much power Adonis would be willing to reveal, and the level of skill he would employ in combat. By watching this fight, he could finally see it. He's improved, combat-wise. A lot, actually. Ray smiled. I know he's holding back, but from what I can see. Adonis, you've grown in more than just stats and skills, huh? The finesse that Adonis displayed throughout the fight, and how he made Chigo, one of the class giants, go out in such a humiliating manner, caused everyone, particularly Ray, to smile in amazement. Now then. I better go tend to Chigo and his bruised ego. Later that day. The practical session finally came to an end after several hours of its commencement. The students displayed clear signs of exhaustion, and all of it was perfectly normal, considering how much energy they had to expend. Not only were the exercises tasking on their physical bodies, but they also had to utilize mana for most of these skills. In essence, it was a very exhausting experience. As I expected, Chigo's ego was bruised after fighting Adonis. Thankfully, he was able to redeem himself in the last part of the practical session. Ray thought to himself as he looked at his 2 teammates. Weapons are his forte, so he helped out the team in that. I guess that's why he can still smile, even after he was humbled so badly. In the end, practical sessions were training simulations and exercises, so as long as not only Chigo, but everyone else, took it as an opportunity to learn something new and improve, they would be fine. Speaking of everyone, Ray looked around him and caught the students all in their respective groups either gnashing their teeth in nervousness, or talking very excitedly amongst themselves. The only students doing the latter belonged to Lucille's group. As for Adonis and his team, they were mostly silent. Even the usual loud and optimistic Moracho was quiet, probably because he lost so miserably in the individual match, and he probably never had a chance at redemption, unlike Chigo. Ultimately, everyone was seated on the floor or standing, waiting for instructor Israel to finish compiling their scores and announce their positions and points. It didn't take long before all of this was done. Now then, I'll announce your positions and points, starting from the first position to the last. Instructor Israel spoke, his voice stern, though his gaze soft on the students. All the listening students gulped and waited, their eyes darting around to perfectly guess the winner of the round before the instructor spoke. Ray already knew the answer, though. It was Group 3, me J.A., Luke I.A., and Amanda, you are first place, with a total of 84 points. Indeed. Their team had the most outstanding performance, and Ray already knew they would be the victors. While most people were more concerned about their victories and survival, Ray had spent most of his attention on the other teams in order to assess them, as well as copy all their useful skills. It was because of this that he now had a fair understanding regarding the capabilities of each student. He knew their strengths, weaknesses, their effectiveness on a team, their personalities, and most importantly, their level of ability. Realizing that Lucille's team would win was merely a consequence of that. Second place is Team 5, Rai, Chigo, and Lu FFA, with 78 points. As the instructor said this, Ray smiled and nodded. He also expected this much. And then, third place will be Adonis' team, with at least 72 points. It was fun doing mental calculations in his head, but Ray made sure not to get too carried away by his internal thoughts. After all, there was something else he had to achieve in the current scenario. We didn't get first place, but we did really well. Thanks for your help, guys. He turned to his team members and flashed them a proud smile. He. Just glad we didn't end up with last place. Lu FFA took it all in good faith and gave his usual loud laugh, covering his eyes as he chuckled. As for Chigo, whatever. You weren't too bad yourself. He tried to put on a tough front, but it was clear that he was the most excited among the three boys. He couldn't even hide the sparkle in his eyes, or the slight hints of pink on his cheeks. Much to everyone's relief, even the last place got relatively high points, and that was mainly because each round in the practical session catered to certain kinds of students in certain teams, so they had an advantage in at least one thing. No team was too much of a loser, since they had a decent victory in at least one round. Good work, students. Now, back to the classroom. The teleportation technology of the Dragon Empire was so advanced that they didn't have to walk to their classroom. They were simply teleported there, so all they had to do was find their seats and return there. As everyone did so, Ray found himself fist-bumping the two dragon newts that were his team members, and he could see that Lucille was also doing the female equivalent of that with her own allies. Good. This was a good way to blend in more with the class and make friends. Ray smiled, subtly nodding to Lucille, who reciprocated almost instantly. Everything was going smoothly. Asterisk. 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 A/N. Thanks for reading. Mass release day 1. Yai. Settle down, everyone. I have an important announcement to make. Once the practical sessions ended, the students were given sufficient time to eat, discuss, and have fun overall. Ray ended up spending most of his time with the boys he befriended, who introduced him to other boys. As for Lucielle, she practically did the same with the girls. Only a few people, like George, Yama, and of course Adonis, remained on their own despite the cliques that formed around the class. Amanda was also in the habit of that, but all of that changed when Lucielle forced her to participate in the girl clique, and she seemed to be fitting in well among the ladies. It was while this was going on that instructor Israel suddenly entered the class and used a more serious voice than usual to declare an announcement. The moment he said this, everyone fell silent. They all returned to their seats as quietly as possible, and once they were all settled, they kept their gazes on the instructor, who had waited patiently until everyone was ready to hear the news he heralded. The White Dragon Lord is currently on her way to the academy. Once the bombshell landed, it seemed as though the class had become even more quieter than it was before. A hollow silence permeated the classroom, and tension rapidly began to build up as the students found themselves staring at each other and fidgeting. What their instructor just told them was heavy news. Heavily amazing news. You are all together in the central auditorium for a grand assembly. Also, this matter only concerns the 3 basic stages, so the other stages will not be participating in this assembly. The more Israel spoke, the more the tension spread. It was clear that the students had a lot to say, and plenty more to ask, but he wasn't going to give them the time to get it out. The other classes are being informed of this by their instructors, so we are going to head over there once I'm done here. Due to the oversaturation of mana that would be caused by many people gathering in the central auditorium, teleportation to that location wasn't possible. Space would be too distorted for a stable mass teleportation measure, though the dragons were currently working on how to get rid of that problem in their technology. As a result, all the students had to walk there. None of them seemed to mind, and were even displaying signs of overexcitement. Instructor Israel noticed all of this and decided not to hold his students back any further. All right, everyone, let's go. This time, there were no cliques or separation between boys and girls. Everyone was simply gushing about how excited they were for the White Dragon Lord's visit. I can't believe this is finally happening. It's been months since I last saw her. I'm so excited. Me too. What do you think she came here to address? What else? He. They chattered on and on as they walked to the auditorium, especially to Ray and Lucielle, the 2 newest students in the academy. The White Dragon Lord was the head of the Imperial Academy, which made her the most important figure on school grounds. Of course, she was secondary to the Emperor, but still. Her authority on campus was unmatched, even among the other lords. Other than that pertinent fact, she was also a Dragon Lord. It wasn't every day that students got to meet Dragon Lords, after all, especially the one who was said to be the prettiest of all of them. Only those who dwelled in their domains, or in the capital, could boast a frequent encounter with Dragon Lords, and even they wouldn't have had many opportunities to hear a lord speak to them directly. It was for these reasons and more that the students were all excited. To many, the White Dragon Lord was their hero. Many dreamt of serving in her squad once they became qualified, while others simply dreamt of the day they could speak with her. You're excited, right? Right. They expected Ray and Lucielle to display the same levels of interest as them, and the 2 did not disappoint. Oh, of course. I can't wait. Me too. With such a festive mood in the air, the students of Class 1A made their way to the central auditorium. Damn, this is impressive. As expected of the architecture within the Dragon Empire, the central auditorium was elegantly designed both in terms of its interior and exterior. Ray had already been shown the exterior when Mijay was giving the tour, and while he was still amazed by the pristine design, it was the interior that really made him nearly gawk as soon as he entered. It nearly resembled the setting of a royal court. The clear floors seemed to be made with glass marble tiles, and the ceiling was so high up, that it felt like the heavens itself. There were flags raised on both left and right ends of the hall, with chandeliers reflecting pure white and golden rays on everything beneath them in order to grant more life to everything their light touched. The auditorium was large enough to contain every single dragon in the academy, so that spoke greatly of its size. However, since only the students of the basic stages were present, it seemed even bigger than normal. Comfortable chairs were properly arranged in the hall, and their designs alone screamed luxury. The central stage was elevated to such an extent that even anyone at the furthest side of the room could view the speaker. Designs that displayed wealth and prestige covered the walls of the auditorium, and it was clear that no expense was spared in its construction. It was simply an amazing haven. If this is how the auditorium of an academy is, I wonder what the premises of the lords, and then the emperor look like. This was even more luxurious than the royal council's palace interior. Ray's comparison was cut short, though, as the sudden distortion of the space before him caused all his senses to focus right in front where it was taking place. What seemed to be mist wafted around, creating what appeared to be a swirling gateway. And within that gate emerged a woman. The White Dragon Lord. Asterisk. 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 A/N. Thanks for reading. The students were arranged in orderly fashion within the auditorium, and this order was based on class. Those in Class A occupied the front row seats in the auditorium, and these front row seats were divided into 9 rows signifying the 9 total stages that existed in the academy. Since only the basic stages were present, they occupied the first 3 rows with the Class A students directly opposite the tall stage. Ray was at the very front of the stage, so he had the front row view of her appearance. She had a long, flowing white gown almost as if it was a part of the mist that she proceeded out of. Her long white hair danced behind her, distorted partially by the closing spatial rift behind her. The white tail behind her, coupled with her even whiter wings if that was even possible, seemed to be carved from the very essence of beauty. Her perfectly white outfit matched her pale skin, and even the accessories she donned on her hair, wrists, fingers, neck, and ears, all matched her aesthetic of purity. Her legs remained unseen as a result of the long gown, but everyone who laid eyes on her could use their imagination to visualize how perfect they would be. Her chest was particularly bountiful, and her hands seemed small and delicate, even within the long white gloves that she employed. Then, there was her face. She was gorgeous with 6 horns that gloriously protruded from the corners of her head like a crown, or like a flower. Then, she opened her eyes, revealing her perfectly blue ocean eyes. It placed nearly everyone who laid eyes on her in a trance. Even the instructors, as well as other staff present, were gawking at her beauty. Every dragon in the hall could agree she was the epitome of beauty. Greetings, students, staff as well. Her melodious voice rang beautifully into the ear of every person in the auditorium, and they all smiled. They wanted to hear more. I have come to bring good news to you all regarding your excursion, as well as the last event for this semester, the interclass exchange. The moment she said this, a thunderous cheer echoed from the audience. Students and staff jointly found themselves roaring in cheers and praise as soon as the White Dragon Lord confirmed their suspicions. This was good, no, beyond good news. It was amazing news. I know things have been a bit rocky here, especially after the excursion was postponed last time. But, I have finally sorted out all the details, and it is guaranteed this time. More thunderous cheers followed. I will now tell you the details of the excursion. Due to how late it has come into the semester, the arrangement will be slightly different from what you're used to, so pay close attention to what I'm about to say. Instant silence echoed within the hall. Everyone held their breaths, just so there would be no sound, and they waited for their head to lay down the details. All 3 stages will go on this excursion together. I know this is different from the usual plan, but since so much time has passed due to postponing the excursion for so long, We had to make this compromise," she said with a sigh. The listeners understood why. There has to be enough time to accommodate the interclass exchange before they go on break, and I don't want to overextend the semester's length, since you all have your plans for the upcoming break. Everyone nearly shed tears as they heard her compassionate rationale. The standard practice within the academy regarding excursions was to let the first stage go to the designated location and spend a week there. After that, it would be the turn of the second stage students who would spend a week as well. The last, but not least, would be the third stage. It was only until the return of the third stage students that the interclass exchange would begin. The current arrangement was a great departure from the usual, but none of the students were upset in the slightest. This time, your excursion will last a total of 10 days, and as I just finished saying, it will involve all the stages in the basic curriculum. Once you return from this excursion, you'll be given 3 days to rest and prepare for the interclass exchange. Many nodded in excitement, while some gulped. The interclass exchange was the biggest, as well as the most dangerous, event that happened in the basic stage at the end of every semester, and it served as a game changer for those who participated in it. It basically involved a draw-based system where the students who were qualified to participate, those who passed their respective class preliminaries, would be made to fight against students of the same class but of different stages. Hence, students from Class 1A, 2A, and 3A would be chosen at random to face each other, and the same metric would be applied to the other classes in the basic stages. Winners would be granted points based on their accomplishments, but those who lost could also lose points based on their failure. A good example would be a student from Class 2A losing to a student from Class 1A. While the one from Class 1A would gain massive points for their success, the senior who lost would have points subtracted from them. Hence, the whole competition was a gamble. The rewards were worth it, though, so most students desired to take part in it. After all, this was the most guaranteed way to get promoted to a higher stage or a better class. Even if students didn't win, as long as they could impress the judges, points would still be given to them, and they could be promoted to a higher class, all depending on how they fared. This was the main reason why most students were excited for it, even the ones in grade 3. Fighting against their juniors didn't seem very appealing, but since they could be guaranteed a chance to be promoted to Class A, if they won, many saw this as a very easy way to achieve their goals. As for those in Class 3A, this was the chance unlike any other. If they did phenomenally well and managed to win in the exchange, they could be chosen as a potential member of one of the 7 squads. They could become a disciple of a dragon lord. All of these prospects made the interclass exchange something to look forward to among students, as there was something in it for practically everyone involved. Also, there's one more good news. Everyone ceased their excited murmurs and returned full focus to the flawless beauty before them. As she parted her seductively moist lips, they swallowed their saliva and clung to her every word. I am currently on the lookout for potential disciples, and so I will be paying special attention to this exchange. If I am sufficiently impressed, I will be taking 3 people to my domain for discipleship. The crowd nearly lost their minds the moment they heard this. This was an opportunity that not even their instructors could dream of attaining, and it was something she was presenting those in the basic stages. All at once, every student jumped on their feet and gave their white dragon lord a standing ovation. She truly was the epitome of perfection. Asterisk. 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 A/N. Thanks for reading. This is it. As Adonis heard the words that the white dragon lord uttered, he couldn't help but smile widely as his eyes bulged in shock. If I do well in the interclass exchange and get her attention, that means I won't have to wait until I get into the third stage. I can achieve my mission faster than I expected. Each dragon lord had their domains in respective parts of the empire, but they also had tons of business in the capital, which meant that Adonis would be taken to the capital on at least a few occasions if he was to become the disciple of a lord. This is perfect. A bead of sweat fell from his face as he intensely stared at the dragon lord before him. All I have to do is win. Thankfully, I'm up against Newts, so it shouldn't be too difficult. The only person he could consider giving him some trouble would be Ray, but even if Ray won, as long as Adonis was among the top 3, he didn't really care for anything else. In essence, as long as he played his cards right and didn't fool around, this was pretty much guaranteed for him. All right then, let's do this. Ray couldn't believe his ears. This is the perfect opportunity, isn't it? He thought to himself as he looked at the white dragon lord with wide, nearly adoring eyes. If Adrian, Luciel, and I impress the white dragon lord, we'll be able to accomplish our mission faster than I expected. From what he could see, there were no real challenges among the other students. Well, except for Adonis. If he ends up fighting me, I'll have to show no mercy and beat him before he gets the chance to get any attention on himself. Adrian should also be thinking the same thing, which means Luciel is our only weak link. Yes, Luciel was a lot stronger than before, but there was no way she could beat Adonis, especially if he wanted a piece of the cake that the white dragon lord was offering. Which means I'll have to sabotage him one way or the other. Ray didn't care about the means. This was too good an opportunity to pass up, so if Adonis ended up facing Luciel, he would have to find a way to make sure he lost. I'm sorry in advance, man, but this is too important. As soon as he finished making up his mind, Ray turned his head a little to the left and looked to his side past his fellow classmates and to the row where the Class 2A students sat. There, he saw his target. The boy had polished black hair, bright blue eyes, and wore his uniform in the neatest manner possible, a model student in every sense of the word. There was one major problem, though. He was not a dragon. There were no horns on his head, no wings clinging to his back, and no tail to be found. This individual who sat among the strongest of Stage 2 was not a dragon, but belonged to the race that they despised and hated most, human. Adrian Chase. Ray's thoughts trailed as he found the boy staring straight to the stage, grinning from ear to ear. There was amusement and also discernment in that smile of his. Looks like we're on the same page. Still, though, it was impossible not to notice the slight commotion that was going on around Adrian. None of his classmates sat near him, and they all gave him terrible looks, all of which was to be expected, considering the kind of race he belonged to. He was the only one in the entire auditorium who wasn't a dragon. Everyone is trying their best to hide their discomfort at the fact that he's human, but they're failing miserably at it. Ray smiled. He had noticed this the moment he first spotted Adrian, as soon as he entered the auditorium, and even wondered what the White Dragon Lord's reaction would be to the presence of a human tainting the purity of the dragon students she seemed so proud of. Much to his surprise, she didn't say or do anything about it. I think I get it now. There wasn't any other possible explanation than the one Ray had been suspecting for some time now. It's because of his backer, a dragon lord. Mere dragon newts wouldn't want to get into trouble with a dragon lord, which was probably why they were trying so hard not to show their disgust towards him, though all of that was in vain. Rather than bully him, they all simply ostracized him. As a result, they couldn't particularly be held accountable for anything regarding him, since they simply refused to associate with one that they deemed inferior. It's not just his class too. Even the students from my stage, and the third stage, are looking at him strangely. Ray could bet that they would have torn him limb from limb if he wasn't affiliated with a dragon lord, just from the look in their eyes. I guess this just goes to show how important it is to have the backing of a lord. It was all the more reason why Adrian, Luciel, and himself had to impress the White Dragon Lord above all else. I hear she only takes in females, but that won't matter if Adrian and I decimate the competition. Luciel should also be able to hold her own. Ray didn't want to be overconfident about the whole thing, so he decided to do some research after the Grand Assembly was over. And by research, he meant asking his newfound friends more questions about the interclass exchange and the White Dragon Lord. I suppose this is as good a time as any to reveal the location for your long-awaited excursion. I promise, it's a place none of you have ever been to before. As the White Dragon Lord spoke, everyone held their breaths and waited. You'll all be going to the southern continent. Huh. Ray's eyes widened the moment he heard this. He was immensely shocked. That's where Ader, Belle, and Justin are, isn't it? This can't be a coincidence, right? Asterisk. 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 A/N. Thanks for reading. Well, I guess it's time to find out what everyone else has been up to. Hope you're excited. Boom. A loud explosion ruptured within a massive cavern, causing the stalactites and stalagmites in the cave to tremble, with pieces of the ceiling even cracking due to its ferocious impact. The monstrously huge cavern soon quieted down, though, and two silhouettes emerged from the origin of the eruption a place further into the depths of this hellscape. As the two walked away from the carnage and devastation they left in their wake, they finally reached the first source of outside light they had seen in nearly 2 weeks. Ha, finally, that's the entrance, right? The male between the two retorted, his voice a little hoarse thanks to his very gory experience within the dungeon that he and his partner just finished conquering. Beside him was this very partner, a beautiful, petite girl, whose body face had now been smeared with dirt and grime. It didn't help that sticky sweat clung to her aching body as she slowly moved beside the boy. Two of them looked exhausted beyond words, yet they kept moving towards the gloriously gaping entrance to the dungeon. They were so focused on this that they failed to notice the person who sat next to it. Until he called their names. Justin, Belle, looks like you're all done. As these words proceeded from the third person in the room, the two allies stopped dead in their tracks and looked in his direction. They were met with the handsome face of an ebony man with red hair, a complete black suit, and a very chilling smile. Unlike their very ragged appearance, his dressing was posh, and his entire body was fresh. As he sat on the elevated platform, watching the two stare at him with multifarious emotions embedded on their faces, he gave them a round of applause and added a chuckle. Congratulations. I always knew you could do it. As soon as they heard this, they heaved a sigh, one filled with both relief and mild annoyance. Why, thank you. Ader. Justin mumbled, itching the back of his head as he straightened his body, causing many snapping noises to echo in the air. For throwing us down there and believing in us. Is that sarcasm I sense? Ader's smile only grew wider as he raised his eyebrow, addressing the very exhausted Justin. The latter couldn't even look him in the eye upon hearing the response. Can you blame him? We spent almost 2 weeks in there, without any prior warning too. It was torture, you know. This time, it was Belle's turn to speak. Her tone was a lot more respectful than Justin's, but tinges of frustrations were inevitably present there. What they had gone through was extremely dangerous, after all. Well, I knew you could overcome it, Belle. The mere fact that you're standing right in front of me is proof of that fact. The moment he said this, the girl's cheeks burned bright red and all her anger evaporated. If you say so. She gave a fleeting whisper. Upon witnessing all of this, Ader couldn't help but smile proudly at the two otherworlders before him, his most valuable pawns at the moment, especially thanks to the transformation they had to undergo during such a short duration of time. These two, Belle and Justin, had managed to conquer a pseudo-calamity class dungeon all by themselves. And they succeeded. Of course, this was only thanks to the fact that Justin was practically immortal, and Belle had Ader's protection cast over her. Still, the mere fact that they were able to make it out and within such a short time spoke volumes of their abilities. How do the both of you feel right now? Ader asked them, his smile only growing wider by the second. There were many things they could say at that moment. They could complain about their exhaustion, their hunger, their anger, but none of those came to mind when those two opened their lips. They were only expected to give one answer, and they knew what it was. Stronger. I feel stronger. And then the monsters just wouldn't stop at that point. Right, Belle. Yeah. We had to run multiple times. Yeah. Exactly. As the two teenagers regaled Ader of their adventures within the depths of the dungeon, as if he hadn't been observing them every step of the way, he was engrossed in thoughts of his own. Justin and Belle should soon awaken S-tier classes, given their current pace. I think it'll be a little before Master reaches SS tier. How exciting. He smiled, nodding silently as he thought on what they had to go through to achieve such results. This dungeon is special due to the fact that its first floor is the most difficult, and the last floor is the easiest. I had to send them to the very bottom, so they could make their way up. I was worried it would take longer, but they didn't disappoint. As a result, both Justin and Belle had crossed level 200. Justin's class is Shadow Assassin, and Belle still has the Heretic Mage class. Soon, they'll advance. The both of you did well. He finally spoke up, interrupting their storytelling attempts. They both grinned happily, probably because Ader had freshened them up with magic, and they were finally able to eat something nice after spending weeks underground. By the way, Ader, you just transported us here straight from the royal estate. Where exactly are we? I mean, where is this dungeon located? Justin asked. Yeah. Aren't we supposed to be trying to get the giants on our side? Belle asked her follow-up question. Ader couldn't help but chuckle in amusement. After all, we are currently at the heart of the giant civilization. Yeah. Both Justin and Belle responded at the same time, their eyes nearly bulging as soon as they heard this. Rather than wasting time telling them the details, Ader reckoned that it was best to just show them, so he instantly transported the two of them, including himself, right outside the dungeon. There, they were greeted with fresh breeze, the bright evening light, and a very flat landscape that covered the land for miles. However, that wasn't the only thing their eyes witnessed. This is hundreds of tall and massive humanoid entities, all having tattoos on their bare skin, and primitive clothing as wares, stood right before the trio, clearly waiting for them to leave the imposing structure of the dungeon that stood erect at their back. These were giants. They had ashen gray skin, and their tattoos were white and black. The shortest giant was at least 5 meters tall, and there were hundreds of them. Only one thought existed in the minds of Belle and Justin as they watched the colossal entities. This will be tough. Yes, they were a lot stronger than they used to be, but they were still recovering from their exhaustion, so it was practically impossible to win with such odds. The current number of giants was also something to be worried about. They couldn't take them down, even if they tried their hardest. Don't worry, you two. Ader's soothing voice suddenly rang in their ears, and it was followed by the most shocking thing they had seen all day. The hundreds of giants went on their knees and bowed before them. No, before Ader. They're on our side now. Asterisk. 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 A/N. Thanks for reading. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's mass release. All of the giants, in their magnitude, were in submission. This absurd sight sparked wide eyes and gaping mouths from both Justin and Belle, as the two couldn't believe their eyes at the moment. They cast their gaze at the man who had the full respect of the giants, and he was simply smiling casually. Almost as if the whole thing was nothing. How? When? Ader said, turning to Justin, whose mutterings managed to reach his ears. What kind of question is that? Both Bell and Justin fell into further confusion, but thankfully Ader clarified what he meant with his next statement. While the two of you were in the dungeon, I figured I could simply conquer them to kill time. Why, you already conquered all of them? Yeah. You look so surprised. Ader gave Justin a smirk, then turned to Bell, whose face was already red as a tomato. It wasn't that difficult. Only Ader could say something like that. Once the two teenagers realized this, they swallowed any other question and doubts that they had and simply nodded. So, Ader turned towards the giants, particularly the one that stood at the forefront of the rest of his brethren. Have you prepared what I asked for? In response, the giant grunted and nodded his head very slowly. According to the culture of giants, it was disrespectful to speak back to superiors, at least, not until explicit permission was given. As a result, most giants could only speak to their leaders with grunts and signs. Ader found this to be a little distasteful at first, but it didn't bother him any longer. I suppose it's grown on me. Whispering to himself, while nodding his head at the giant's words, he turned to Justin and Bell. Both of you will have to follow these giants. They'll take you to the quarters that I asked them to prepare for you. Yeah? What about you? Belle quickly let out a protest, and she was joined by Justin's rapidly bobbing head. Haha. I have something else to do. I'll meet up with you two later. The duo looked at each other and sighed, deflated. They knew better than to question Ader or challenge his authority. Instead, they simply agreed and walked towards the giants. Now then. As he watched them from behind, Ader's smile broadened, and darkness began to surround him. The space around him seemed to distort and bend, with flashes of black and red energy dancing around him, all of which were encapsulated in a single second. Then, whoosh! He completely vanished from the place that he stood. So, where exactly are we going? Out of the two, Justin was able to work up the courage to talk to the giants. Both he and Belle sat on the shoulders of the tallest giant of the bunch, one that stood at about 9 meters. His skin was a tad darker than the rest, and he had far more elaborate tattoos on his body than everyone else. He was clearly different, perhaps the strongest of their group. I don't think they can speak. See how they didn't say anything to Ader? Belle said, almost with a sigh. Both of them didn't know about the culture of the giants, particularly the reason why the giants couldn't just have a conversation with them. And so, they had to endure the deathly silence while watching the brave new world they were in unravel before their eyes. The giant chief's residence. It stood at the very center of the giant civilization, boasting of a massive compound that could contain thousands of giants with ease. The entire race dwelled in a single city, though calling it that was a compliment that their primitive settlement did not deserve. It was more akin to a village than anything else, albeit a very large one. The giants were about 50,000 in population, with half of them being women and children. The rest were the men, strong, hefty giant men. As a result of their relatively small numbers, they could dwell in the same place, led by a single entity known as the giant chief. His power and prestige were beyond what a single person should have, making him more akin to a deity in the eyes of his people. A supreme god, perhaps. His residence boasted the most advanced architecture, but even that was unimpressive by any modern standard. Giants lived in stone houses designed similar to small mountains. The giant chief had numerous mountain-like peaks converging together to form his grand palace. To every giant, this was magnificent in the most amazing way, but it wasn't very impressive. Still, since the giant race was quite primitive, they had no issues with their architecture, clothing, and other essential aspects of their culture. Most importantly, their chief never desired for it to change. And so, it remained. As long as their chief, the strongest of giants, was pleased with their work, they were pleased with it as well. Well, Chief, what do you think about my story? Deep within the cluster of mountain-like buildings, at the grand throne room where the giant chief's throne stood erect, Ader's voice echoed very ominously. The stone carvings and primitive drawings that littered the hall were still intact, and the several massive statues were ever so present. Everything about the structure was unimpaired, as it had always been, yet, something was off. Perhaps it was the fact that, rather than the giant chief, the tiny figure of Ader sat on the great throne. He made himself at home in the colossal chair, staring above him as he smiled in amusement. And then, hovering above the polished stone floor of the hall hundreds of feet in the air was the terribly massive body of the chief. He was wrapped in black chains that tied every part of his body. His hands, legs, neck, and even his crotch, everything was tightly bound by the giant constraints that ominously leaked out malevolent energy. The same godlike figure that ruled the giants now powerlessly stood still in the air, completely at the mercy of their new deity. I think it's quite amusing. Asterisk. 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 A/N. Thanks for reading. Day 2 of mass releasing. Let's go.